Emily married a millionaire thinking she was escaping misery. But on her very first night in the mansion, she uncovered something that changed everything. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a survival test. She walked into that marriage like someone running through fire, afraid but hoping that whatever was on the other side had to be better than the life she was leaving behind. Emily grew up in a neighborhood where dreams died before they ever had the chance to begin. Since the age of 14, she had washed dishes, cleaned houses, cared for the elderly, anything to put food on the table. Her mother was sick and barely able to get out of bed. Her father had left when she was still carrying a school backpack. Emily never had choices, never had luxuries, but she always had urgency. It was during a charity gala, where she clearly didn't belong, that she met Henry Whitmore. A man in his 50s with tired eyes, a quiet kindness, and a presence that filled the room. Widowed less than a year, Henry didn't need to tell anyone he was wealthy. His suit, his gestures, even his silences made it clear. He noticed her, moving between trays and dirty dishes. She tried to keep her distance, but he struck up a conversation. No pickup lines, no arrogance, just genuine curiosity. They talked right there, between the rush of waiters and the clinking of silverware. That night he made her laugh, something rare in her world. 2 weeks later, he returned to the restaurant, alone, just for her. And he kept coming back. In less than 3 months, Henry proposed. Emily hesitated, not because she didn't want to say yes, but because she was afraid of looking like an opportunist, afraid of herself. But Henry was direct. "I know you come from a different world than mine, and that's exactly why I want you." She said yes. But what Emily didn't know it was that Henry was hiding something that hadn't been buried with his late wife. Something, or someone, still very much alive in that house, and she would only find out on their wedding night. The Whitmore mansion looked like something pulled from an old dream catalogue. Triple-height ceilings, marble staircases, portraits that seemed to watch you, and a silence so thick it swallowed the sound of your own footsteps. Emily stepped into that house like she was entering a whole new world, and instantly felt something was off. It wasn't one thing in particular, it was everything. The housekeeper avoided eye contact. The staff walked on tiptoes. The late wife's bedroom was still locked, as if she might return at any moment. And strangest of all, the West Wing was off limits, its doors always shut, its silence enforced by a rule no one dared break. That night, Henry tried to be gentle. They dined alone in the winter garden, surrounded by candles and silence. Looked at her with tender eyes. But something behind that gaze seemed to be pulling him inward. Emily could feel it, the weight behind his smile. After the toast, his tone turned heavy. "Before you go upstairs, I need to tell you something. But not tonight. Tomorrow," Emily insisted, feeling uneasy. But he gently touched her face and said, "Just trust me for tonight." Later, while he was showering, Emily wandered the mansion quietly. She went down the main stairs, walked the long hallways. Then she heard a sound, soft, almost inaudible. A child crying. She followed it to the West Wing, the forbidden side of the house. One door was slightly open. Inside was a room filled with old toys and dusty furniture, and a little girl, sitting alone on the floor, holding a teddy bear. Emily froze. The girl looked up. Her eyes were blue, just like Henry's, but she said nothing. Just then, the housekeeper rushed in, pale-faced, and slammed the door shut. "You shouldn't be here, Mrs. Whitmore," she whispered without meeting Emily's eyes. "Please, go back to your room." Emily barely slept that night. Who was that child? Why had Henry never mentioned a daughter? Why did everyone act like she didn't exist? The next morning, Henry said nothing, pretended everything was normal. But Emily already knew. This marriage wasn't a fairy tale, it was something much darker, something with no name, something about to explode. In the days that followed, Emily tried to act normal, but inside everything had changed. That little girl, the blue eyes, the silence, the isolation, wouldn't leave her mind. She confronted Henry the next night. He said, his voice heavy, "You weren't supposed to see that, not yet." Emily didn't shout, she didn't accuse, she just waited. He hesitated. then finally said, "Her name is Charlotte. She's my daughter. But she never knew her mother." Emily was confused. What did he mean, never knew her? His wife had died less than a year ago. "Her mother died in childbirth," Henry explained. "And Charlotte, she has a severe condition. She doesn't speak, doesn't respond, doesn't smile. She doesn't even make eye contact. She lives in her own world. That's why she's kept isolated." His pain was real, but there was something he still wasn't saying, something heavier than grief. He was carrying a truth too heavy to name. Over the next few days, Emily tried to reach the child. The housekeeper kept pushing her away, but Emily persisted. She brought toys, told stories through the door, sat on the floor for hours, even when there was no response. Until one quiet afternoon, Charlotte approached. She placed her small hand on the glass, and for the first time, looked straight into Emily's eyes. In that look, there wasn't just silence. There was fear, and a silent cry for help. At that moment, Emily knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a girl who was isolated. She was hidden, and that house, it was hiding a secret far bigger than any diagnosis, a secret the housekeeper knew, that the staff feared, and that Henry tried to bury. Emily was no longer just a wife escaping poverty. She was now a woman trapped inside a dark pact, and she would have to decide if the price of truth was higher than the price of the lies she'd bought with a wedding dress. The key had been left on the library desk, as if someone wanted Emily to find it. Maybe the housekeeper, maybe Henry's own guilt. It was gold, old, and engraved with the initials AW. Emily held it for several minutes before deciding what to do. Her heart beat like a drum. She knew that room wasn't just forbidden, it was an unsealed tomb. That night she waited for Henry to fall asleep. She slipped down the stairs in silence, heart pounding in her throat. The mansion seemed to breathe in whispers. The hallway leading to the locked room felt longer than all the others. The key turned easily. The air smelled of dust, sweet perfume, and absence. Everything was exactly as it had been on the day Henry's wife, Amanda Whitmore, died. Dresses still hung in the closet. Jewelry rested on the vanity. A brush with strands of her hair still lay on the bed. But it was the desk, in the corner that caught Emily's eye. There she found a journal. As she opened it, Amanda's final entries were scattered, confused and painful. She wrote about voices, about being watched, about a growing fear that something was wrong with her daughter. "Charlotte looks at me like she knows, like she's judging me," one line read. "Henry doesn't believe me, but I know what I saw." The last page had been torn out, as if someone had tried to erase the final truth. Emily shivered. Amanda didn't seem crazy. She seemed terrified. And completely alone. That's when she heard it. Slow, heavy footsteps approaching the room. She turned off the light and hid behind the curtain, barely breathing. The door creaked open, and Henry walked in, but he didn't turn on the light. He just stood there and whispered, "I told you it was too soon," but Emily didn't move. She didn't know if he was speaking to her or to his wife's ghost. That night she knew for certain there was something Henry didn't want her to find. And maybe Amanda had never been insane. Maybe she had just asked too many questions. In the days that followed, Emily could no longer trust Henry. The man who once seemed kind now had too many shadows behind his eyes. Every silence felt like a secret. She started watching more closely, listening to what went unsaid. The mansion, once quiet, now whispered behind walls, doors that shut on their own. Staff exchanging wary glances when Emily neared Charlotte. But what truly shattered her was an overheard conversation. She had passed by the kitchen when she heard the housekeeper whispering on the phone. "The new wife already knows too much. If she keeps getting close to the child, she could end up like the other." Emily stopped breathing. The other. Amanda. Now she was sure Amanda's death hadn't been an accident, and Charlotte might have seen everything. That night, Emily sat on the hallway floor just outside Charlotte's room. For the first time, she shared her story with the child, told her about growing up poor, about her sick mother, about how she married out of desperation, not love, about the fear, the loneliness, and what she found in Amanda's room. Charlotte, didn't say a word, but she listened, her eyes glistening. Then, she picked up a notebook and drew something. A woman with long hair, Amanda, lying on the floor. Behind her, a man. Henry. Emily felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Charlotte had seen everything, and this wasn't a condition. It was trauma. She wasn't a sick child. She was a silenced witness, and Emily knew if she stayed quiet, she might be next. Emily didn't sleep that night. Charlotte's drawing felt heavier than a confession. It was a sentence. The girl, once thought to be nonverbal, had spoken in the clearest way possible. And now Emily knew too much. The question was no longer if she should leave that house, but how, and with whom. She couldn't leave Charlotte behind. Next morning, Henry was unusually attentive, his eyes constantly on her, his gestures overly gentle, as if he suspected something. Emily kept her mask on. She smiled, acted normal. But inside, she was already planning her escape. She began hiding. Small amounts of money, noted the staff's routines, learned the less monitored paths through the mansion, but what haunted her most was that Charlotte's room was locked from the outside every night. On the third night, she faked a headache, skipped dinner, locked herself in her room and waited until the house went still. Then, for the first time, she entered the west wing through the service door, just like she had seen the housekeeper do. Charlotte was awake, wide-eyed, but not afraid. Emily hugged her tightly. "We're getting out of here," she whispered. "I promise." But the door creaked as it closed, and when Emily turned, she saw him at the end of the hallway. Standing in the dark, Henry. He held a glass of wine. And his look was no longer kind. It was the look of a man who realized he was about to lose control. "I tried to protect you from this," he said, his voice low. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Emily." Emily stepped in front of the child, her body tense. "And you have no idea who you're dealing with now, Henry." Charlotte, trembling, gripped Emily's hand. Courage had replaced fear. Emily wasn't backing down, not this time. The hallway pulsed with tension. Henry stood like a living shadow, gripping the wine glass by its stem, his expression a mix of disappointment, rage, and something darker. "You shouldn't be here, Emily," he said, voice tight, restrained, like a storm barely held back. Charlotte squeezed Emily's hand tighter. Emily could feel the girl's shaking fingers. Her own heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she didn't move. "I saw Amanda's room. I read her journal. She wasn't crazy, Henry. She was afraid of you." Henry closed his eyes for a moment, trying to compose himself, then gave a cold, bitter smile. "You don't understand. Amanda was unstable, dangerous. She yelled at Charlotte, shook her, said the girl was evil. I had to act." Emily felt her stomach turn. "You say that like it was noble, but it was cowardice. You murdered your wife and locked away your daughter." The sound of the wine glass shattering against the wall snapped the air. Henry stepped forward, fists clenched. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he roared. Charlotte let out a small sob. But Emily stood firm, eyes blazing. "And you have no idea who she is with now. She's with me." And that's when Charlotte spoke. Her voice came out rough, trembling, like it had torn through years of silence. "I saw, Daddy. You pushed her. You pushed Mommy." The silence that followed was brutal. Henry froze. The world seemed to stop around them. His eyes filled with something that wasn't guilt. It was panic. Emily didn't waste the moment. Quickly, she scooped Charlotte into her arms and ran downstairs. Henry came after them shouting, "She's lying. Charlotte doesn't know what she's saying. Come back here, Emily." But she was already running through the main hallway, grabbing the phone in the library. Her hands trembled, but she dialed with determination. "Police. It's an emergency. A murder was covered up. I have a child at risk. Please send a unit to the Whitmore mansion immediately." Henry appeared at the door, his face drenched in sweat, eyes blazing with rage. "You just ruined your life, you know that." Emily held Charlotte tightly. "No, I ended a lie." The sound of sirens came like a wave of relief. Red and blue lights flashed through the stained glass windows. Within minutes, the mansion was filled with police officers. Henry resisted. He shouted. He cursed, but he was overpowered and handcuffed in front of everyone. The housekeeper wept quietly in the corner. The other staff watched in silence, but in their eyes there was something else. Relief. As if they too had just been freed from an old, crushing weight. Emily collapsed to the floor, still holding Charlotte close, and there in the heart of a house that had once been built on silence and pain, the truth was finally spoken. Out loud, without fear. The morning sun streamed through, the stained glass with a softness the house hadn't known in years. The mansion was quiet again, but now it was a different kind of silence. Not the suffocating hush of buried secrets, but the peace of a chapter finally closed. Emily spent the night at the police station, giving her statement, shielding Charlotte with her body, her voice, her soul. The little girl fell asleep, wrapped in Emily's coat, like a daughter who had finally found her mother in the middle of chaos. Henry was charged with first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and unlawful imprisonment. Under pressure, the housekeeper confessed. She revealed she had known about the push at the top of the stairs, the argument before Amanda's death, and the money she received to stay silent. The Whitmore empire began to crumble. But Emily didn't want its leftovers. She didn't want the mansion, the jewelry, or the prestige. She wanted peace, she wanted dignity, and she wanted Charlotte to be free. Soon after, Emily was granted temporary custody of Charlotte, now facing a new challenge, rebuilding their lives away from the spotlight, away from headlines and away from pain. She moved with Charlotte to a small town far from curious eyes. She sold a few inherited pieces and opened a modest children's bookstore, humble but filled with warmth. Charlotte began attending therapy, enrolled in a kind-hearted school, and little by little, she began to smile. A year later, Emily officially adopted her. The hearing was simple, but the moment was profound. Charlotte entered the courtroom wearing the same blue dress she had drawn in her notebook. But now her eyes sparkled, and when the judge asked if she wanted Emily to be her mother, she answered confidently, "She already is, ever since she saved me." Emily cried right there, without shame. She cried for Amanda, for herself, and for every woman who had once silenced their truth out of fear. And in that embrace in front of the judge, everything made sense. She hadn't just escaped poverty. She had run toward her worth. And now she finally lived a life where she no longer had to hide, no longer had to be quiet. Sometimes love doesn't begin with flowers, but with courage. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the system, but from someone choosing to say, "Enough." Emily said it, and changed not only her own story, but that of someone who needed it most. Charlotte never returned to silence, and Emily never again settled for less than she deserved. If this story moved you, share it, because someone in silence may be waiting for this very kind of courage.